going to talk again today about a technique that I think is vastly overlooked and probably not taught as much as it should be. Now, I quite often go out walking and I make little sketches like this, and I make lots of notes on colour, the direction of the light, and I try and remember as much as possible as well. But it's this little sketch that I'm going to work from today. Now, this technique or this method I think is largely overlooked, and about how really important it is or can be. And I probably get quite a lot of hate down in the comments, people telling me that I'm wrong. But I'm prepared for that. It's fine. But I think really, if you go out walking or you go out and about, anywhere you go, make little sketches as opposed to taking photographs. And now with the invention of smartphones, everybody's got a camera in their pocket pretty much all the time, and so it's very easy to take a photograph and then go back to your home or your studio or wherever you work and then make a painting from that, and something gets lost. Cameras have the ability to really oversaturate the light and the shadow, and quite often you'll take a photograph, or I do anyway, and I'll look at that and I'll kind of forget what drew me to that scene in the first place. But if you make a very quick simple sketch just using a pencil or a pen or whatever you have at hand, make lots of notes on the colour. You can take a photograph as well, just so you don't forget, but really if you rely on that sketch more than the photograph to create your painting, a lot of the time you can end up with a far better finished piece. Now, I'm not saying don't work from photographs at all. Obviously photographs are very useful and a very powerful tool, and you can get a lot of information in there, and it's obviously very good to work from that. But maybe try doing a sketch from your photograph as well, and then make notes, and then maybe put the photograph to one side and then see how you get on just working from that very simple sketch. Especially if you want to try and paint in a looser, more impressionistic way, then try this method, and I promise you it works. It works for me anyway. I'll talk a little bit about what I've just done on the paper. So I brought in some ultramarine, some raw sienna, a little bit of light red, and I added a tiny little bit of water onto the paper before I started, just to soften everything and get everything moving around. And so now I'm bringing this all the way down to the horizon, and I'm looking at my sketch, I'm looking at the colour notes, and I'll put this sketch on Patreon, and I'll put it on a members post on YouTube as well. That'd be for paid members, and then you'll be able to save that photograph, and then you'll be able to look at that, zoom in on it if you want, and work from this sketch by all means. But I brought in quite a soft sky, quite hazy. It was quite a hazy day, fairly autumnal, early autumn, so everything's starting to turn brown. And I brought that wash of the sky all the way down to the horizon. Now I've got some cadmium yellow, a little bit of raw sienna, and some of the greys that are gathered there in my palette as well. And so I'm bringing in a wash over the land. Doesn't matter if the sky wash runs down into that slightly, I'll be covering it over in the second stage. So getting quite a bit of variation in this colour. So I've got some burnt sienna in there now, a little bit more raw sienna. Now I've got the light coming in from the right hand side, so I can get away with being a little bit lighter over on this right hand side of the painting. So I'll have my shadows going off towards the left. So building up a wash over the land. Let's touch a little bit of viridian into this mixture as well. Tiniest little bit, I don't want it to be too green. So cutting around the shape of the river. Can get a little bit of light red in there as well. And again, touch some of that in over on the left hand side. little bit more viridian in there now, so making this colour slightly greener, slightly warmer as well, a little bit bolder as I come down towards the foreground. I've just picked up a little bit of ultramarine, and before this dries I'm going to get a suggestion of some distance in there that's pretty much just going to melt away into that sky wash, and I can bring that all the way across very quickly. Zero detail in there at all, it's just so there's something there behind the trees when I lay those in. So bring that all the way in. Let's get a little bit of cobalt, a little bit of light red. Could touch some of that in slightly darker. And again, a lot of this is just going to really blend in with that sky wash. It's just so there's something there behind the trees to help with that sense of distance. Now I'm going to dry this completely. So that's the sky, that's in, there's some distance in there, and I've got a first wash all the way across the land. And now I need to bring in some trees, little bits of detail across the land and some colour in that water, and I'll get some reflections in there as well, tie everything together. So now I'm looking at my sketch again, and the notes I made on colour for the trees were grey with a hint of brown in there, so I can drag in some shapes of the trees. Again, very simply, this is very similar to how I'd work if I was working on location, simplifying everything. So concentrating on the main shapes, the large masses. So there's one big shape for some trees there. Let's get some raw sienna, a little bit of burnt sienna as well. And again, referring to my colour notes on my sketch. And I wrote something about it being autumnal, hints of brown and orange. So I can bring in very simple tree shape. Let's get some ultramarine now and a little bit of raw sienna. Can make the tree on the left hand side slightly darker. It's a tiny little bit closer to us. And again, using the side of sable brush. I think it's the size 10 brush. And a little bit of burnt sienna. And I've got this larger tree. Using the side of the brush again, dragging down, so I get tiny little broken edges here and there. Let's get a little bit of ultramarine into that mixture now. Tiny little bit of cadmium yellow as well. And so building up shape of a tree. Again, very simply, I don't want to start over fussing. Make the tree a little bit darker as it comes down towards the bottom, as it meets the land. Can use the dark of the bottom of the tree there as well to cut around and leave little areas of grass coming up. So putting a dark shape next to a light shape, always a good idea. Tie that shape down into the land. While I've got that dark on the brush as well, might as well drag some darker areas in these trees. Let's make the dark slightly lighter on this right hand side. It's still slightly wet as well, so I can lay back into that very quickly without it forming any cauliflowers. Also, the paint's slightly drier, so there's a little bit less water in there, so it shouldn't cause any blooms or any problems on the paper. So now let's continue this shape out. Some smaller bushes and trees. And using the brush straight down, dragging straight down, using the shape of the bristles really to form these trees. And so now I've connected everything together, everything's joined all the way across the painting, so I've got nothing standing out on its own. So let's mix up a little bit more dark, some ultramarine and burnt sienna, and again I can lay that in over the top. It's slightly thicker paint, so I can work back in and get some real strong dark shadows at the base of all of these trees. Slightly darker still with the mixture there, so it's almost black really. Again, burnt sienna and ultramarine. So let's clean the brush off and pick up a small sable brush. I think I'll suggest a few branches in there now in the large tree. So again, mix that up almost black. And let's just flick out a few branches, not too many, don't want to over fuss it. I don't want to start adding lots of tiny little twigs. Really just the main shapes is enough. And then join that into that dark shape across the bottom of the tree. Can flick some of these branches out at the side as well. And let's suggest a few little marks in these trees. Don't want to overdo it on the detail really. The focal point I think is the larger tree and its reflection in the river, so keep everything very simple everywhere else. It's just a few marks in these trees just so we know what they are. Now let's go back to a slightly larger brush. I can start bringing in a wash again over the land to suggest some shadows and some texture. So I've got some raw sienna, cadmium yellows, very, very dilute. Now I can start bringing that in now. I don't want to cover up completely everything in the first wash, so leave a few little areas behind, little areas of light. Now I've just varied that mixture. I've got some of the palette grey as well as a little bit more raw sienna, and now this area on the left hand side is largely in shadow. Now again, referring very quickly to my sketch and my notes that I made. Also using my memory and what it felt like to be there on the day, and it's quite amazing really how the simple act of making a sketch really commits the scene to memory. You remember so much more than if you just stood there and took a photo. So now building up a wash for all these areas of light and shadow. I've got a little bit of burnt sienna into that mixture. Can bring this bank down on the right hand side. I can bring it down at a slight angle. But bringing it in as one big bold wash, all connected together, not fussing around, flicking up lots of little bits of grass or anything like that. Don't want to get caught up in that trap. of adding too much detail. Really just painting the shapes and making sure everything's connected together. Let's grab a little bit of cobalt blue, touch that in down in the foreground while it's still wet. And a little bit of light red as well. And again, while it's still wet, drop that in. Always helps with an area in shadow. I can start working on the surface of the water. So again, referring back to my colour notes, and I just wrote light blue. And so it's bring in some cobalt blue, I can drop it in and then get a lot of water in the brush, soften it all, drag it all together. Let's get a little bit of ultramarine down there as well. I can touch that in to the edge of the bank and some of that shadow wash will run down. That helps to connect everything together. Let's touch a little bit of that raw sienna mixture as well. Suggest some reflection coming down from the sky. And so a very simple wash across the surface of the water. And that will all come together once I start adding some darks around the edge and the reflections from the trees. So let's mix up a little bit more dark. Again, ultramarine and burnt sienna. And while it's all still wet, lay a little bit of dark in around the edge of this bank. Now there are lots of reeds and little bits of grass and things growing up the side of the river there. And I can suggest all of that very simply. Now the river goes off round the bend. And let's touch a little bit of dark in around this left hand side, not too much. And connect all of that in to the bank. Might as well lay a few darks in across the land while I've got this paint mixed up. And while it's all still wet as well, it will soften off. Now I think if I were to be working from a photograph of the same scene, I find it's quite easy to really get a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of detail you have in a photograph. And also photographs never seems to capture the scene how you remember it for some reason. It will take in far too much information. The darks and the shadows and everything will be too dark, too saturated with colour. So working from a sketch in this way really enables me to paint a very loose scene, and I'm just relying on that information that I jotted down at the time. And so it helps me to keep everything very loose, very impressionistic. Now that water surface has dried off just enough now that I can start laying the reflection from the large tree. So I've got a mixture of blue, tiniest little bit of cadmium yellow in there as well, and some of the greys from the palette. And so I'll keep varying that mixture. Don't want to lay it all down in one colour. A bit more cadmium yellow in there, tiniest little bit. I don't want it to be too green, so really it is just the tiniest little bit on the edge of the brush. Some slightly darker paint in there as well. There's that little branch that sticks out. I can very simply suggest that. So bringing this reflection down, one joined up shape that very loosely mirrors what's above. I don't have to copy everything exactly. I don't have to mirror all of those branches down there or anything like that. I want to create the impression that it's fairly slow flowing river. So create an impression of lots of little ripples on the surface of the water. And it's probably the simplest way to go about doing that. And let's suggest a little bit of reflection from the bank and also that tree on the left hand side. So the same kind of thing, very simply brought down, tiniest little bit of paint. Again, doesn't have to be an exact mirror image of what's above. And let's bring in a reflection of the bank. Just a little bit of blue grey that's gathered in the palette. Bring that all the way across. Quite often when people paint rivers like this, they seem to make the reflection of the bank a little bit too small. I think it always looks better if it's slightly thicker. And the slightest little suggestion, reflection of the top of those trees. Not sure if it was really there on the day, they might have been a little bit further away, but it just seems to tie the painting in a little bit better if I suggest that. Now let's mix up some quite strong dark. Burnt sienna and ultramarine again. I can start bringing in some tiny little dark areas across the land. And a little bit more dark in this tree. Let's strengthen these branches. They got a little bit lost in there as it's dried, so I can add some quite strong dark. Little tufts of grass and things like that can be suggested with a little flick of the brush. These reeds along the edge of the river as well. Now in reality there'd be thousands of little bits of grass flicking up there, but I don't want to overcomplicate it. Don't want to make everything look too busy, so a few little marks with the brush really I think is enough. Don't want to detract from the focal point by having thousands of little marks flicked up with a brush there. So now adding some darks across the base of these trees in the distance, making sure everything's connected together. Nothing's standing out too much on its own. Strengthen a few of these little tree trunks. A few more little tufts of grass here and there. Some slightly bolder shapes down in the foreground here. I don't need to do too much of it at all. Again, don't want to overcomplicate and busy that foreground too much. And I think we're pretty much done. And before I dry it off, let's just add tiniest little suggestion of some more areas of foliage on these trees. Let's make it slightly darker on the left hand side as well. And tiniest little bit on these trees in the distance. And they're quite far away, so I don't want to do too much on them. And now let's just grab a piece of plastic card, scratch out the tiniest little highlight along the edge of the river there. A couple of little pieces of grass. Don't need much at all. Just one or two highlights here and there. And I think that's pretty much enough. Just breaks up some of those dark shapes. And I think I'll call it finished. Okay, that's the painting finished. So painted entirely from a sketch. that I made on location, so not relying on a photograph at all for any of this. It was all my sketch made with a pen and a pencil and my very simple colour notes, and then just what I had in my memory of the feeling of being there on the day. And now obviously it's perfectly fine to work from photographs, it's not a problem at all, but do try, as a little experiment maybe, making a sketch from your photograph before you start painting, and then make notes on the colour as well, and then try working from that and see how you get on, especially if you want to try painting in a looser, more impressionistic way. It's a good way of going about it. And if you can, obviously get out on location and do sketches when you're there and try working from those. Take a photograph as well, just to help your memory if you need that. But do give it a go, and I'm pretty sure that if this is the style that you want to try and paint in, it will really help you on along the way. Anyway, let me know what you think about this, and I'll be happy to answer any questions and all that kind of stuff if you have them. Anyway, thanks for watching as always, everybody, and I'll see you next week.